What we're going to cover today is a little bit of our X and GFX history and the sensor technology, so you have a better understanding about where we're going. Of course, the major part is about the X-Pro3, and anything else of interest, please ask. So it doesn't have anything to do with the cameras here. It doesn't have to be an X-Pro3. The rules, of course, at any time, please ask a question. I got no problem with that. And I really do believe the only stupid question is the one you don't ask. So don't walk out of here feeling ashamed that, you know, maybe it's a silly question. If I can answer a professor of optics from Sydney University who asked me a question about sensors that I thought he really should have known the answer to, that's no problem. Ensure you try out the cameras as well. We've got all the cameras and lenses. If you don't see all the lenses here, I'm pretty sure I've got them all here. So ask about them, try them out before you leave. But first, of course, the big rule is photo printing. It's pointless taking these photos if you're not printing them. As far as I'm concerned, printing photos is the best way to save your memories, the best way to record history, and it's the best way to archive. And that's really not my words. That's the National Archives in Canberra actually stated that digital photo life is expected to be about 20 years. Printed photos will last around about 500 years. So those photos from the 70s, 60s in the shoebox under your bed are going to be around a long time after Facebook and Instagram and YouTube and all that. So the current range from Fujifilm stands at this point. You will see other cameras that are still around. The X-T20 is still a current model, as is X-T2, though there's not too many of those left out there. So these are all our latest current models. I've divided them up into areas, so we'll explain that. The top three cameras there on the left are medium format, the 100 megapixel and the 50 megapixel cameras, three of those. Below them is our little tough camera, the waterproof, dustproof, shockproof, freeze-proof. Great camera to take with you all the time, no matter where you are. If you're going on a holiday, you might go swimming, you might not want to take your normal camera or even your phone to a beach, whereas that you can keep with you while you're in the water. To the right of those are what we call our standard sensor cameras, standard being the standard Bayer filter censored cameras. The XF10 is a little fixed lens compact, the XT100 very popular beginner's camera, and the new XA7, which I just happen to have here in the mint colour. And this is a new one. Even though it's 24 megapixels, it's a new sensor, and it's probably, as you can tell by the 16:9 ratio screen, it's probably a little bit more oriented towards video. Even has self-timer video functionality on there as well. Down the bottom, of course, the cameras that I particularly like and had a lot of involvement with, and they're the X-Trans cameras. So we've got the 24 megapixel ones on this side and the 26.1 megapixel cameras on the right-hand side there. These cameras were designed around our very unique X-Trans CMOS sensor, which we'll talk a little bit about now. As I said, a little bit of the history, because I've been there even before this started and was privy to a lot of the conversations and discussions as to why we did what we did. So the X100 was our first camera, first X-series camera. It came out after that gap between the demise of our X-Pro series and S-Pro series, not X-Pro. And it certainly accentuated the fact that we wanted a premium product. The other thing that we decided we needed was a unique selling point, and when the X-Pro 1 came out, that unique selling point was the full frame picture quality without the size and weight. In other words, what we were trying to figure out was how we could get a premium product with full frame picture quality, yet not have the size and weight of a full frame. And that literally led to the change in design, the fundamental change in design of our sensor. So we were looking at how we could get full frame quality out of an APS-C size sensor. And as I said, that's what led to this, the X-Trans sensor. We moved away from the Bayer filter design and created our own irregular filter array in the X-Trans sensor. And that system gave no moire, so we didn't require an optical low-pass filter, we didn't require moire processing. Optical low-pass filters, lower resolution, moire processing, lowers quality. So already you're starting to be ahead of the race without having to deal with that issue. By tweaking the sensor a bit more, we were able to get a much higher resolution output. And look, I know there's some interesting things being said about it, but at the end of the day, go and take a photo with a full frame camera, take a photo with our camera with a comparable lens, you know, maybe a 35 for ours and a 50 for a full frame. You won't find any noticeable difference, really. Aside from the fact you're carrying a lot less weight, and generally people will attest to the fact that the colour on the Fujifilm is a lot better. The aim here was to get the full frame quality and resolution without the size and weight. In 2014, we introduced this camera, the X-T1, with our new functionality, which in a lot of respects was the old functionality. We went back to the buttons and dials that were the classic, and it became a bit of a trademark of our cameras. In 2015, we, even with the re-engineering of the whole X-trans sensor and the positioning of the lenses closer to the sensor with a shorter flange back distance, we found that at 1.2 we just couldn't quite replicate the shallow depth of field of an 85 1.2. And so we developed this lens in addition to the 56 1.2, and this was the 56 1.2 APD, the apodized lens, and it incorporated a graduated ND filter in here, and without going to all the engineering explanation, it basically meant that if you were coming from a full frame background, in particular using an 85 1.2, this is the sort of lens that you would want to use on one of our cameras to achieve the same look, shallow depth of field, and a beautiful bokeh as well. In 2016, the X-T2 and X-Pro2 appeared, and of course these really pushed us very much into the pro area. The cameras the performance was up, the usability was up, and many wedding photographers traded their big heavy kits for the smaller, lighter cameras here because they found they could get the same results. In 2017, we really upped the ante and introduced this camera. It was our first medium format censored camera, which now, to try and distinguish it from the full frame terminology, we've started to refer to it as large format or large format digital. In or out of the studio, this camera worked really well. It was fully weather resistant, it was much faster, it had a lot of features that have never been seen on medium format cameras before, and it certainly proved its worth in many different situations. In 2018, we introduced a camera with in-body image stabilization, the XH1, and it became a very popular camera for people doing corporate videos because you could literally shoot in camera. Yes, you could shoot out of camera, you could record through the HDMI port, you could do your color grading if you want, but corporate video is so competitive at the moment, the costs have to be kept down. If you can shoot, edit and ship your video, basically, that's where you need to be. And that, combined with the 16-1.4 and the 23-1.4, gave people that ability. Of course, 2018 also saw the 50R, our rangefinder style medium format, and of course the incredible X-T3 and X-T30 with the new processor, and of course the Generation 4 X-Trans sensor with the 26.1 megapixel and lower noise, higher sensitivity, better light collecting ability, the whole thing. And of course we were able to give you up to 60 frames per second 4K 10-bit video, 20 to 30 frames per second blackout free shooting, and of course the little X-T30 took a lot of those features from its bigger brother, the X-T3, and really it's a bit of an odd one out in that market because it can do so much more than other cameras at that end of the scale. So what is the result of all this? It has actually, at the end of last year, pushed us to #2 worldwide in mirrorless. Now that's an interesting place to be because for nearly 3 years, mirrorless has outsold DSLR. So I'd be hoping to do a talk like this again in the future where we see a #1 up there. It's another 4-lettered name that starts with S. Oh look, I've got a bit of a soft spot for Sony because, well, a long time ago I couldn't afford any of the bigger names, so I bought a Minolta. So I have a lot of Minolta film gear at home, and I sort of see Sony as Minolta, so I don't mind that really. They'll happily fit into the #2 position. Oh, sorry Sony. But we won't stop developing the products. We are going to continue on. In 2019, of course, this camera appeared earlier this year, the 100 megapixel GFX camera, or 102 megapixels in actual fact, and this again, we rewrote the book yet again in medium format. An incredible camera, phase detection focus, full frame 4K video, in-body image stabilization. It's smaller than some full frame cameras, and yet it's a very high speed, very powerful medium format product. And now of course we get to the X-Pro3, which is essentially a camera that's taken the guts of the X-T3, incorporated that into an X-Pro2 body, but then we haven't left it alone. We've had to go and add quite a few more features. It's a very different camera. Even though it looks very similar to its predecessor, the X-Pro2, it is a very different camera. So that's a summary. Yeah, you probably don't need to read all of that because we're going to cover a lot of this as we work through this. So if you are looking at this camera, yeah, we say pure photography. It is much more, it's more like a film camera in the way you use it. And at first you might think, oh, you're sort of used to looking at a screen on the back. Well, it doesn't take long to get back into the swing of actually using it as a true camera in a lot of respects. But let's have a look at some of the things and the improvements. The durability for a start. We've actually created a titanium shell, so magnesium frame, titanium shell on here, and titanium, of course, a much more difficult metal to work with. Some unusual things that have been made with titanium, of course, the SR-71 Blackbird and the Guggenheim Art Museum. It's a very tough metal that resists corrosion, even resists chlorine and seawater. Titanium, however, has some different methods that have to be used to process it. So our factory has had to change the way we deal with the shell production, and this video just shows you some of the things that we had to go through to produce the titanium shells for the X-Pro3. While there's a lot of mechanized production work here, the final finishing is actually done by hand. And the name can't be painted on, it actually has to be laser etched. Yeah. So titanium is nice and strong. All the three colours that will be available in X-Pro3 are titanium shells. The black camera at the top there is more the traditional paint finish, the black, just like the X-Pro2, its predecessor. But the other two colours you'll notice are called Dura Black and Dura Silver. This is not just a colour. So the camera I have here is Dura Black, the X-Pro3. It's almost like a gunmetal grey in some respects. There is also a Dura Silver. It's more like a champagne silver. The Duratec coating is a cold plasma technology that bonds a protective coating to the titanium. So not only does titanium add strength, but the coating adds what's virtually a scratch-proof coating to the actual body of the camera. This is a bad idea to show this video just before you go to dinner with 100 photographers, because what's on the table in a restaurant? Knives. Now we take the Duratec camera, and you see scratches of a hell of a lot more than the previous one. So I showed that the other night to a whole stack of photographers just after the release of it, and we were in a restaurant, I passed the camera around, and of course there are knives on the table, aren't there? So I invite you later on to have a look at the base of that. That's easily had at least, and by now, 100 people scratch it with knives. So have a close look at that, and bear that in mind when you look at the bottom of the camera. So that is the Duratec coating. It is a little bit different. The camera has, in fact, even though a lot of people pick the camera up and say, oh, is that lighter or smaller than the predecessors? In actual fact, it's not. It's just a tad larger and a tad heavier. Not by much, but it is a little bit larger and heavier than the previous ones. And of course, we've got the 3 colours rather than the 2 or the single colour that was in its predecessors, the X-Pro2 and the X-Pro1. The other big change, I suppose, is the viewfinder. So we've actually improved both viewfinders. Of course, the trademark of the X-Pro series has been the optical viewfinder and the digital viewfinder. And what we've done here is we've made the optical viewfinder clearer with less distortion and larger and brighter. The EVF has improved as well. It's now 3.69 million dots, so it's a very high resolution viewfinder, and again it is also larger and brighter with a higher refresh rate, up to 100 frames per second, but even then it didn't stop there. We've actually used black frame insertion to ensure that the picture, the refresh rates and the image that you see stays sharp and clear. The hidden LCD is something that has really captured people's attention. Well, I'm not sure if it's the hidden LCD or it's just the little subscreen on the back. But either way, it does work. So yes, you've got what's essentially now a film camera, but you do have the advantage, if you really need to, of actually popping the screen out and viewing in a traditional, more digital camera way. What I have noticed is that some people will actually say that, oh, it's a bit awkward. You know, you can see down like that. That's great for your street work, but if you're trying to see a view above, not so good. Well, I actually say it's actually quite easy, because you simply just turn the camera upside down. You've got a very clear view of everything. Just use your left thumb as the shutter release trigger. Simple as that. So I don't think there's a problem with that design. It actually makes it very easy. So you've got all the advantages of using your more traditional rangefinder style of camera, plus all the advantages of a digital camera as well, in a very tough, hardy case, and a small, traditional looking camera concept. Yes.
How big is the screen compared to like the X-T3?
It's basically the same. It's 3:2 inch. It will be a little bit.
It just looks small.
Yeah, the frame itself, the actual screen size is the same. Where are we? Somewhere here. The actual glass over the X-T3 is a bit wider, but the actual screen size is the same.
Okay.
So.
And then can you do a display where you're just seeing the picture with no information on there?
Yes. Yep. Absolutely. Yeah. The camera is incredibly customizable in many ways. Right down to changing the size of the display, what appears in the display. You know, you can have more information blown up on the screen or the viewfinder, and you can set the viewfinder, the optical viewfinder individually. This has, any which way you want to use it, you can set it up that way.
And when you open the screen up, does the little thing on the back go off, or does that stay?
No, it basically stays on all the time. It is an e-ink screen. Okay. It's not backlit. So it does rely on ambient light to view it, but what you'll notice is it uses very little power at all. It will, in the switched off mode, that's what would generally appear. In the switched on mode, it by default has the box tops, if you like, of the film simulation. We'll get to that in a sec, because it looks pretty cool. But you can change it. You don't have to have it set like that as well. So as you can see here, some massive changes to both the EVF and the OVF, even the LCD, on the X-Pro3 as compared to its predecessors. Film simulations have been vastly improved. I mean, it sounds strange to say vastly improved when we've only put one extra film simulation on there. It has 17 film simulations in here, the new one being the what we're calling the classic neg, which is essentially superior film. So having put all the pro films into the simulation modes, we're now putting some of the consumer film types in there. But beyond that, there's other things you can do. You can actually use the new monochromatic colour. So if you're using monochrome or you're using the acros, you can actually tint at any colour you want. So you can blue, mono, green, red, whatever you like. You can get a 16 or 8-bit TIFF output from the pictures. You can actually control not only the texture of your grain, but also the size of the grain. So you've got large, small grains as well as weak and strong effect. The clarity control, you can actually create more clarity in the image, and you've got your white balance setting by 10K units now has massively improved there. The colour chrome effect still exists in the camera, but we've also added a blue colour chrome effect as well, and you can add both. You can add that with the grain to any of the film simulations as well, even the classic chrome if you want to make the chrome effect that strong. So these are the run of our films, and as they've appeared in the various cameras over the years. Of course, we still have the originals, the Provia, which is sort of our middle of the road standard setting. The Velvia, which is very much a great simulation of our Pro slide film with its stronger, more vivid colours. And of course the softer classic neg has now appeared in here as well. The monochromatic colour, as I said, you can actually choose any colour from that sort of screen there. You know, your blue, orange, red, anything you like. There's a whole stack of strengths you can add to those, so you can create literally whatever you like in the monochrome area. So these are features that have appeared over the years in our cameras, and obviously all those additional film simulations and the textures and everything are now in the X-Pro3, so big improvements there. In the drive function, the actual usability of the camera, the features have expanded. Now this is interesting. I suspect, don't quote me, but I suspect you will probably see some, if not all of this, appear via a firmware upgrade for X-T3, I would imagine. But only given from what we've seen happen in the past. I don't have any inside information on this. One of the questions I've often had recently is, is this going to appear on X-T3? I'd say it probably will. So a much faster, more efficient focus system. It uses phase detection focus down to -6 eV, which is essentially virtual darkness. The AF range limiter is quite useful. You can actually set the exact range that the AF can work in. The shutter release lag has improved. It's faster again now, and the in-camera HDR actually exceeds 800%. You'll be able to manipulate that to a much greater extent. If you have a play with that feature on this camera, please be aware this is a pre-production camera. It doesn't have everything it's supposed to installed in it yet. The HDR is in there. It's missing a few of the names, although the positions are there. So if you want to see something done with HDR, I'll have to show you how to do it. As I said, it's a pre-production unit. It is not a final production run unit. The multi-exposure, finally, I'm really happy about this. Instead of having just 2 shots, we now have up to 9 multiple exposures. And you've got 4 different ways of overlaying them or incorporating them in camera. It's a great feature, that one. And the focus bracketing has improved, and as has the focus stacking as well. So as we said, the focus has improved, so now the phase detection focus operates in virtual darkness. The range limiter has improved. The high dynamic range is all in camera now. And the multi-exposure has improved out of sight. That's incredible. Focus bracketing now is a lot more advanced. Then you shoot a whole stack of pictures and combine them together to get very deep depth of fields. Again, all new features that just simply didn't exist in the previous models. So as I said at the beginning, even though it looks very similar to the previous model, it's a very different camera. So that's the X-Pro3, or a simple introduction to it. if you have any questions, please feel free.
What was the maximum exposure time? I think that's all 60 minutes.
Maximum exposure time, 60 minutes. That's what all of our cameras have done that. But what I've noticed is with the fourth generation sensor that noise levels are much lower than previous sensors. So even though they could still do the 1 hour, the noise levels in here are far lower. I still wouldn't advocate doing a 1 hour exposure if you want star trails, unless you want to have your star trails against a nice starry background. If you get my meaning with the noise. Any other questions?
They all use memory cards or?
Oh yeah, all SD memory cards. This one has 2 slots, and again, unlike the previous model, this has 2 UHS 2 memory card slots. So that's the high-speed SD cards with the dual connections on the back. Previous one had 1 UHS 2 slot and 1 standard slot. So this one has, like the XT3, has both slots are UHS 2 compatible.
It's a slot. It just can start with the slot of your computer.
Oh yeah, absolutely, yeah. Yep. So. Oh God.
Yeah, I know.
So that's no.
So X-T3 is really good with video. How was the X-Pro3?
Good question. Yeah, I think someone's calling me now. Yes, the interesting point now with video. Okay, so XT3 is definitely extremely good with video. It was designed to be 60 frames per second, 10-bit. This will still do your 10-bit 4K video, but up to 30 frames per second. There is a catch. There's no HDMI port on this camera. So while you can plug in an external microphone, while you can record 4K 10-bit internally, it has no HDMI port that allows you to connect an Atmos screen or something like that to it. So if you are going to be sort of a little bit more serious in your video, you'd probably go with the XT3. However, the video capability of the camera is such that there'd be nothing to stop you from shooting a high quality 4K video, you know, just maybe not quite so serious as you would with the XT3.
Is it an ideal travel camera?
I think so. I think, the hallmarks of travel cameras generally something small, usually with a viewfinder, and something that's got a good range of compact lenses, or maybe something with an all-in-one lens. So we've got the 18-135, which will work on there quite happily. You can use the digital viewfinder for that.
Is that an all-in-one lens, is it?
Yeah. So yeah, the 18-135 would be an all-in-one lens. I do a lot of talks and have a lot of involvement with the cruise industry. So because I've done a huge amount of cruising, and I find people will either go prime or zoom. If it's zoom, it's usually 1 lens, 2 at most. If they're going primes, there's probably going to be a wide and a mid, and perhaps something a little bit longer, not by much. And I think 23, of the 16, the 23 and the 50, 3 lenses that work extremely well and would work extremely well on this. So I've got the 16 2.8 on there, the 23 f2 is on there, very small, sharp, clear, great for that. And the 50mm f2 lens is not much larger, and that equates to about 75, so it's quite a good portrait lens. It means if you're shooting pictures of people, you don't have to get right up on top of them, and you've got a nice... That camera is small enough not to attract a huge amount of attention.
Doesn't have any stabilization, right?
No stabilization. The stabilization comes with the lens. So if you, like for instance, the 18-135 will give you 5 stops, but through lens shift stabilization. But there's no in-body stabilization with that one.
And the prime, so they have only a Pepix 100.
Yep.
So like rangefinder, so
Yep.
they're really interested in that. But any of the lenses that are fixed focal lengths?
The only fixed focal length lens that has stabilization, I suppose, the 90mm. And, well, I suppose you said the 200, it's not exactly a travel lens, mate. Sports lens, maybe. But I would find, I've never had a problem, even with the 50mm. And I've had these cameras out and about a lot with the primes. I sort of, swing from sometimes I get right into the prime area, and then sometimes, oh no, it's much more convenient to use the zoom. But I've travelled extensively with the 18 to 135, and especially around Pacific and those places. And I found it very convenient, very sharp lens. And with the smaller bodied cameras, even the XE3 works fine. But I think if you are travelling, the viewfinder is absolutely necessary. I don't find it very convenient using even a bright screen out. If you've been through the Middle East or Hawaii, Polynesia, Pacific Islands, I don't know, the sun is just a hell of a lot brighter, and without a viewfinder it's very difficult. Also, I find I'm now starting to require glasses to read, so I can adjust the viewfinder to my eye without glasses. It makes it much easier to nail the focus.
How would you compare the X-Pro3 with the X-T30? Because, well, I understand the X-T30 is kind of like more for photography, but otherwise similar to the X-T3. So
well,
it's sort of...
X-T30 is essentially all three cameras, as the X-T3, X-Pro3, X-T30, all share the same sensor and the same processor. So they can all produce exactly the same picture quality. Probably at the moment with X-Pro3 having the advantage in the benefit of having the more advanced focus system and the colouring and such like. But technically speaking, they should be all capable of the same picture quality.
Those features won't go back to the other.
The issue is really to get those features in the other cameras. It would be difficult because these have the quad-core processor. None of the other cameras have that. You'd be more likely to see these features pop up in GFX 100 rather than any of the other cameras, because the others all use dual-core processors. The GFX 100 and the three X-T3, X-Pro3, X-T30 all use quad-core processor.
So they would have the same. They've got the same phase detection.
So these all have the 2.16 million dot phase detection focus system. As I said, the X-Pro3 is going to have the advantage by having it tweaked so that it can actually operate at lower light. I guess, I'm only guessing that that feature will probably appear at some stage via a firmware upgrade on the X-T3. But so far as the X-T30, I often joke and say that the tech's got slack because on previous models they limited features. So on the X-T10 and the X-T20 they were cut down versions of the X-T1 and the X-T2. But on the X-T30 you've got the full suite of autofocus tracking modes, and it is virtually the same camera in a lot of respects, speed of operation and such like. What you do lose is the high end, I guess, in the video. You don't get the 50-60 frames per second, but you can still shoot 4K up to 30 frames per second. You can plug headphones in, you can record externally, you can shoot F-log. Not that I think anyone buying this camera is probably going to be shooting F-log video, but it's actually possible. It's small, it's light, and... Sorry? The viewfinder, is here, but it's a little bit lower resolution and a little bit smaller. But essentially the electronics are still X-T3, and they haven't been hobbled as we've done in the past. And so if you like X-T3, and for instance like me, my wife doesn't quite share my passion for photography. When she uses this camera, she only knows two things, and that's how to put the flash up and this magic little switch here that puts it into auto override, so it's now point and shoot. So that's great for me because I can flick it back and have the camera set up one way, and my wife can just do her happy snaps. I'm going to get the same picture quality, resolution. I got nearly all the features on here that I've got on X-T3, but I've got the convenience of that auto override, and even to some extent the built-in pop-up flash rather than having to add a flash to X-T3. So for, again, a smaller, lighter travel camera, there's that. The other thing, of course, is that surprisingly, when you've got a little camera that looks like a toy camera, you can get into certain places where other cameras won't be allowed. For instance, The stadium over in Perth earlier this year took that in there with the 16-1.4 lens and the 35 f2 in my pocket. No problem getting in. The security guard saw it with me, looked at it, and oh yeah, that's okay. But he wouldn't let people in with much, really lower quality and lower resolution DSLRs. I think they had the Jurassic World display in the museum here. You weren't allowed to take pro cameras in there, but no problem getting that in. So sometimes it pays not to have a professional looking camera, and certainly that will work wonders. But it's something else, I think, to have the convenience of the film style camera, the optical viewfinder. I like that optical viewfinder because you can actually see outside the frame as well. And so if you're taking a photo and you're concentrating through the viewfinder, you can actually see someone coming into the picture, and then when they are actually in the picture, you can decide when to shoot the image. You've got a bit of warning there. You can switch to the digital viewfinder, and in a situation like this, very low light, I mean the optical viewfinder is great when there's plenty of light, but if you've got no light, the digital viewfinder really comes to the fore. You can see very clearly. The camera does have the predictive exposure capability, so what you see is what you're going to get. Of course, if you're in a studio, you would probably want to switch that off, and you can do. So you can go into your screen settings and turn that feature off so that you're not sort of stuck having to try and look at dark settings in the viewfinder. So any which way you look at it, you've got more choice in some respects on this camera than you have on other ones. So you can still put all the big lenses on here. The downside, if there is one, there's no additional battery grip. There will be another grip like this, a metal grip, which will give you a bit more size to hang on to, and it'll be the Arca Swiss mount, so it will clip into the standard tripods. You still have USB-C on here, which I still think we haven't quite investigated all the options that USB-C provides, but you can certainly run the camera from a power bank in there. So if you really wanted to run the camera for long periods of time, even just plugging, having a power bank in your pocket or something. And so you can charge. It charges when the camera's switched off, and runs the camera when the camera's switched on. So in some senses, I think having the optical and the digital viewfinder actually has certain advantages. And of course, if you are into street photography, this is more the classic street photography design camera. But what I've also noticed is that in street photography, you tend to attract a lot less attention with that style of camera than with something that looks like a DSLR. And I know that some time ago, with these cameras, people seem to ignore them because, as long as you didn't have a great big DSLR. But even now, they're starting to tweak to the fact that even something like that could be perceived as a threat, whereas this doesn't seem so bad.
Are you going to let the camera?
Sorry?
Is it able to look at the camera?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, no, please. Yeah. All I would ask is that you don't put cards in it and take your own pictures with it. That's a Fujifilm policy. But by all means, if you're happy enough to shoot pictures and play with it, that's what we're here for. So please, take that advantage.
Just probably nice to thank Warwick for being here on all our behalves.
Thank you.